Hello, this is Reverend Marie from St. Mary Magdalene Church on March 20th, 2021, and I hope that you will find God speaking to you through this little simple meditation. Well, there I was, hurtling through the utter darkness, clinging to the bars of my cage and praying that I would just make it through the next few minutes intact. It was my first experience with being underground in a mine, and a mine that was still under construction. The entry portal, with its multiple elevators descending deeper and deeper towards the bowels of the earth, was a long way from the accident site that I was supposed to investigate. I stumbled along the rough pathway in the dim light until my companions guided me to my transport. Then, as they suggested, I climbed into the cage-like affair that was attached to the back of a huge tractor and bounced off the bars as we lurched forward. "Hold on tight," said the driver as he took off at race car speed. He didn't need to tell me twice. I was a pinball in that cage, and I knew I would be bruised the next day. But my pride kept me from complaining. The only lights came from a dim headlight, the driver's headlamp, and a string of pale temporary lights on the ceiling. We careened around a corner, and suddenly we were in total darkness. For some reason, the lights on this stretch had been put out, and just for the fun of it, the driver switched off his headlamp and the light on the vehicle. He evidently thought this was a great joke, and he laughed as we tore along, but I could only pray that he knew the way and we wouldn't end up smashed against the walls. Odd, isn't it? How a few minutes can seem like an eternity when you're terrified? But finally, we rounded a corner and I could breathe again. There was a light ahead, and I had hope that I might survive the experience. That light was not big or even very bright, but it shone, and the light pierced the darkness with that hope of survival. I thought of that experience as I read two statements from the Gospel of John. In the first, John introduces Jesus this way: "In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." The darkness of that ride so many years ago was so thick that it was palpable. That darkness felt as solid as the cage bars that I was gripping with sweaty hands, and it was full of fear. Yet, thick and terrifying as it was, it only took the switching on of a light to bring hope. And oh, how I longed for that light when I was in the darkness. As I sit with this memory, I'm facing a window filled with brilliant sunshine. And that contrast of the memory of the darkness with the bright sunshine is so vivid. I'm reminded that Jesus goes much further than John in describing himself. Not only is the light in him, he says, but he claims, "I am the light." To the terrified woman caught in adultery and publicly dragged before the authorities to be shamed and stoned in the chapter before this statement, Jesus was not the deep darkness of condemnation, but the bright light of forgiveness and mercy and a hope for a life better than the one she's known. After this particular story where Jesus claims to be the light, we hear a story of a man blind from birth, and to him, Jesus was released from darkness and the wonder of seeing the world and the faces of those he loved for the first time. Jesus came offering light even to those who did not recognize their own darkness, the darkness of souls caught in their own sense of power, their own need for self-direction. He said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Jesus stands before them, not a pale glimmer in the distance, but the radiance of the glory of God in their very midst. Sadly, many of the people who heard these words, those who had lived in darkness so long, chose to cling to the bars of their familiar cages rather than to move from darkness into light. They would hurtle along through a life full of unexpected turns in the utter darkness of their own self-will. And how often that choice is still made as we cling to what we think we know, to the familiarity of our darkness, rather than to open ourselves to the light of Christ. And in a world shrouded in uncertainties and fear and sin, still the light of the world stands among us, calling us to choose dark or light, death or life, fear or hope. May we choose to walk in the light, the great light of the I am of love. Today, on this almost spring, this day before spring begins, I invite you to discover Jesus in a new way, to let the light of life shine into the very corners of your soul, and to walk in that light. Amen.